This is a presentation to the Vicksburg Amateur Radio Club by Mike Walker, VA3MW, on software-defined transceivers.
So let's get going. I will blow through a bunch of things pretty quickly. Feel free to ask questions, and I know every once in a while, because of what I go through, I tend to skim over something and leave a bit of confusion, but in principle, this HF radio designed by Gerald Youngblood and everybody, the first 5 or 6 people were there, is incredibly versatile. So if I say something that sounds like it's really limiting it, probably because I just said it wrong. So don't hesitate to ask questions. So back a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, this is probably what an HF station looked like. It might have been your dad's HF station. And I thought this was a great picture till I realized it's fake. There's no wires on the back under the desk. Anyway, but you get the idea. But if you were really carried away back in the late 60s and early 70s, you would have, oh, that wasn't the highlighted screen. You might have ended up looking like this because you needed to listen everywhere. And again, this is just a demo, but you get the idea. We roll forward until this century, and we can now make it a complete station that did all that look like this and make it almost XYL friendly. And this is a complete contest station. The radios do not have to be on the desk anymore. They can be under the desk, beside the desk, different room, half a country away. And well, that's great. What about knobs? People ask me, I don't like a mouse and a screen. Well, we're actually going to convince you otherwise, but for you knob people, we make these great interfaces. This one's called a Maestro. And you'll notice it's not covered in knobs. It's just got the right number of knobs. And a test question for you HF people, and I don't know how many are there, but pretty popular radio is the Yaesu FTDX 5000. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of it in QST or something. Anybody want to guess how many knobs and buttons are on the front of that radio? And since your mic is live, you can just shout out answers.
80.
Who said 110? You're darn close. It's, I think, 118. And they're tiny, and each button has multiple levels of something to do. And you'll see that this is pretty clean, and I'm going to show a little bit more about it. But you got a volume control. I bet you can figure out what this is for, and you can probably figure out what this one's for. Little obvious things like, well, don't need mic gain and CW speed to be different knobs. They can be the same knob, because you get the idea. So pretty efficient. I have one sitting on my desk here, big display. It's an 8-inch display, and I wouldn't leave home without it. And you can take it with you and get on the air thanks to our remote capabilities. And remote's such a mainstream thing, and I'll talk about that near the end of the presentation. And then if you want just a radio to put on your desk or take to field day, because you can hook up a couple of antennas and a battery and get on the air, we have those too. This is the M model. They make in 2 different models, 2 different M models. But essentially, it's a 100-watt HF radio, 163 to 6 meters. And in fact, you could do 630 meters and 2,200 meters if you like. Let's talk a little bit about radio technology. Now, for us old farts, you all know about superhet receivers. And they taught us about that in ham radio school forever ago. And super heterodyne, and you remember what heterodyne is, that's when you get that squealing sound. But in a super heterodyne radio, we mix a lot of frequencies together to eventually get to the point we get audio. And that technology works very good, even though it's well over a century old. And the challenges with super heterodyne radios is they have ugly mixing products. And the difference between a badly designed superhet radio and a good one is how much time and effort the engineers put into getting rid of that artifact, that noise, that smearing. And if you remember anything about mixing, and I love it, I got a live mic. What happens when you mix 2 signals together? Do you know what the answer is? What comes out the back end of the mixer? You get the sum and you get the difference. So if you had 50 megahertz and 10 megahertz and you mix them together, you get 50 megahertz, you get 10, you get 60, and you get 40. And you probably only wanted one of those as an engineer. So you have to spend some time getting rid of the rest of it. Otherwise, it impacts how clean your signal is. So that's why it's so important that we get rid of that noise and why some superhet radios were incredibly expensive. A software-defined radio, or an SDR radio, or direct sampling is the proper term, is what we're seeing where the technology is headed today. Flex radio has been at it for a while. ICOM didn't just get into it, but the 7610 and the 7300, and I think the 705 are direct sampling radios. The Elecraft K4, direct sampling radios. That makes them a quieter radio. And hands up, anybody in that room that does not own an SDR radio. Oh, come on. Everybody owns an SDR radio in that room? It's a trick question, so it doesn't matter. So your cell phone is an SDR radio, believe it or not. And as we've made the technology changes, so software-defined radios is just a change in build technology. We rewind all the way to spark gap and then tubes, semiconductors, integrated circuits, and eventually we end up with things that are smaller and smaller and smaller, faster, cheaper. And we've seen that with cell phones because none of us carry Motorola bag phones around anymore. And the same thing, ham radio has been able to enjoy that technology. So my trick question is, a cell phone is an SDR radio. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but because you guys are going to get the slide deck, you can look at it later. But the advantage of direct sampling is that you can now receive the entire HF radio spectrum all at once. Well, why do I want to do that? Well, that allows us to be several places at once, and why we have these receiver slices, we call them, that can have you sitting there at your computer. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, or in your Maestro or on your radio, where you could be as an HF operator on 6 meters and 160 meters at the same time with the same radio. And this is right out of the box. You don't have to buy anything extra. They're also quieter. They produce a much better signal in crowded band conditions, better dynamic range. That means it's easier to hear weak signals right beside very loud signals. And again, like I said, you can build them cheaper, faster, and better. And so the price comes down. And the key part of this right in the beginning is something called a spectral capture unit. This is the only test question. And some radios have one and some have two in the flex radio world. And the spectral capture unit, or the SCU, is the part that the antenna hooks up to. Now, radios like the Flex 6300, 6400, and 6500 have one spectral capture unit, and the 6600 and the 6700 have two. And when you have a radio that has two spectral capture units, like having two radios on your desk, well, that might seem like a lot. Why do I need that? Well, once you've got it, you just start to use it. And as well, these spectral capture units digitize, turn from analog into numbers, the entire HF spectrum from 30 kilohertz to 54 megahertz. And the Flex 6700 goes a bit more, goes up to 60 megahertz, but it also gets us, because of some really smart math by Steve Hicks and his group, the ability to get 2 meter frequencies, even though they're at low power. So that's the cool advantage of that. And here's a picture. Now, I've got a couple of cool pictures coming up that show the front panel of an M model or a Maestro. I tend to use that a lot because it's easier to see. And if you're not familiar with a pan adapter or a waterfall, the little part on top, right here, where you can see my mouse running, is called the pan adapter. We get to see all the real-time signals. And at the bottom is the waterfall, which is a history of signals. And this is 10 seconds on the top and bottom one. This big horizontal line, by the way, is a lightning strike. And on the top on 20 meters, we get this big, we can see it, but look down here on 40 at the same time, it's noisier and it's broader. And that's the advantage of being able to, some of the things you didn't know you could see before. Horizontal is this lightning strike. The blue is background noise, and these vertical columns are sideband signals, or they could be birdies. And I want you to notice here that in this case, this radio has two radio slices of the spectrum, and they're both using the same antenna, antenna 1 and antenna 1, even though we're on 40 meters here and 20 meters there. Works really well if you have a small station with a multiband vertical like a HF6V or a fan dipole or an end-fed half wave, not my favorite antenna, but they're out there. And it gives you that ability sort of to be everywhere on the spectrum. Now, if we jump forward and we pick up a radio with two spectral capture units, such as the Flex 6600 M and the 6700, which we're just ending manufacture on. It's a parts issue. We will, and I'm not pre-announcing anything, but it does make sense. We will probably replace it with a new model at some point in time. You'll see that now we're on antenna 1 on 20 meters, and we're on antenna 2 on 40. Normally, you'd have to have two radios on your desk to do that. And just look here at the bottom of the Antenna Genius, which is a very fancy integrated antenna switch. I can sort of pick, well, my stepper is what I'm using on 20, which is a tunable HF beam. And I have two wire antennas on 40, and I can flip back and forth in them. So all this cool integration really allows us to new cool stuff. And again, with not having to clutter the desk with a whole bunch of radios. Now I put this in here for later for you geeky guys. You can actually follow the switching, and the RF comes in on the left and it ends up over here in the spectral capture unit, also called an A to D converter, on the right. And it makes this incredibly versatile on how you can switch these around, and you're not limited by low pass filters and a whole bunch of things. So that's I don't know, let me know if you like that or not. And here's just a close-up of the Flex or the M model radio, and how all these buttons are nice, big, easy to use. They're well thought out, and they're the ones we use all the time. And by the way, if I wanted to change from transmit from in this case it's 80 to 40, I just have to push the red button over here. Very obvious what we want to do. All right, this is actually a duplicate slide. So I had just rebuilt these this morning. So I have a video here. Oh, question. Just speak up.
Yeah, you may have thought that you'd have to explain that twice, Mike.
Explain which part?
The duplicate slide, it's a joke. I was just saying you might have a duplicate slide because you might have to explain it twice.
Okay, somebody back there's waving at me.
Yeah, I have a question. Do y'all use in your design field programmable gate arrays, FPGAs, or does that not?
Yes. Yeah, that was, I've tried to make my presentation more on the user side, but yes, the output of the, and I apologize for not mentioning it. So when we digitize all this data at 16 bits, it gets dumped into a field programmable gate array, which does all the fancy math. And to give you an idea of how much data comes out, because we're sampling almost 54 megahertz at 16 bits down to the hertz, it's about 3 gigabits of data, in a little internal network that goes from the ADC to the field programmable gate array. And this is the FPGA is just an incredibly efficient and powerful computer. Believe it or not, it's about an inch square. And if you were to turn that into, how much power is that? It's about 340 Raspberry Pi 4s, I don't know about 5s, running in parallel. There's a lot.
Has that always been the case? Have y'all always used FPGAs, or is that more recent?
On the 6000 series, we've always used FPGAs.
Okay, thank you.
On the previous ones, the 1500, 3000, 5000, a lot of the work had to be done on the computer. So the computer was half the radio. Now all the computers or iPhones or whatever for that matter is just the user display interface, which makes the radio incredibly efficient. And this is one of our mottos, by the way, is to do any new feature integration in the radio, because we don't want to depend on the user interface, whatever that device is, a PC, a Mac, an iPhone, to do any super heavy lifting. I did this video today. It's just a walkthrough of how easy it is and where to find things. Now I showed you the front panel, but let's have a look at the what goes on under the covers. This takes about a minute to run through, and it allows me to get a drink. We're looking at the front panel of a Maestro or an M model flex radio. And I just want to share a few things here that we can walk through. Right now we're set up with a single receiver on a single frequency. There's a couple of ways we can bring up a second receiver on the Maestro. I'm pushing the other RX button, and it's going to bring up a second slice about 5 kilohertz up. And if I unclick the green receive button, it goes away. We also have the ability by touching down here at the bottom with your finger, it opens up a whole second pan adapter and a fair bit of flexibility that way as well. And with a 2 spectral capture unit radio, you can actually have this on 2 different bands. But we can see that, we've got a different filter here at 2.9 kilohertz, 2.7. AGCs can be different. We can adjust the AGCT, and you'll see the values change. And it's just very simple to use. The real reason I want to do this is because of the menu. If we bring up the menu, and I'm just going to quickly pop through some of the choices here, but incredibly well laid out. This tells you about the Maestro itself, the versions, a number of things. I have a GPSDO installed in here for better frequency stability. I can program my function keys. I don't actually have anything programmed at the moment, but there's a number of things. Network information, because everything's LAN based. Well, this is certainly important, but again, all in one place. There's not a really complicated menu system. We have the ability to look at turn our speakers on and off, our balance, and the receive EQ. By the way, very powerful tool, the receive EQ. If you never used it, you may want to. Certainly, we have transmit EQ as well. Next thing is TX band settings, incredibly powerful tool where we have, in this case, 3 RCA connectors in the back for turning amplifiers or sequencers on and off. We can set our RF power, our tune power, and a number of other settings by band, where most radios you're limited by radio. We have complete microphone control, and we can work with pretty much any microphone if you just get the wires in the right place. Bias, no bias. You need some extra gain, it's here. Full transverter support. It's as simple as just adding a transverter frequency. You fill in these very simple numbers. It does a lot of the math. We have profile control. You've got your memories, which I don't have any. USB cable support is for controlling external devices from the back of the radio. And we can turn our spots on so they show up, multiflex, and some debug logging. So that's the power of the Flex Radio Maestro or the M model, and just touch and go. Nice big 8-inch display, really great resolution. Thanks for listening. Alrighty, okay, this is different. I can't jump slides. Well, because without it playing twice. We're looking at the front panel. And so that's the Maestro itself. Sorry for the jumpy display. It was just in the recording. It was pretty screen and invasive. And if you, any HF operators, weak signal operators, 160 meters, low band stuff, do you have a couple there? In this case, there's a fair bit of stuff going on the screen, but it's a de-expedition. Charlie Yankee 0 Sierra on Sable Island. I was working them on 160 meters, and I'm running splits. So here's my receive frequency. Here's my transmit. All these call signs are generated by a skimmer that tell me who's calling them. And I'll show you later, really most importantly, if you ever work a de-expedition on CW, the skimmer helps you find where they're listening, because the guy that works them, it'll pop up as 599, and I'll show you that in a video later. But as well, I have diversity turned on. That's what this third slice is about. And I've got one antenna receiver on my left ear, which is a receiving antenna. It's a DX Engineering active whip. And in the right ear, I've got the full-size antenna, and it's quite, if you've never heard diversity on an HF, it's so cool because it sort of wanders around in your ear, and sometimes the smaller antenna gets more signal, and sometimes the bigger or the smaller gets less noise, but the signal noise ratio is better. So that's one of the very cool things that can happen with using diversity. This is a demo here about some filters, and it's a POTA station, parks on the air station. And while it's playing, and I'm showing receive EQ and a couple of cool things, watch how strong the POTA station isn't and how clear he sounds. So I've got it parked on the air station here, right beside a guy that's splattering. Let's have a listen. We've a little hard to hear. He's weak. Okay, I'm going to narrow down my filter to 2.4. We're now not going to hear this guy splattering as much.
Have a good one. This is KA4KOE, parks on the air.
Now, watch what happens. I have a 2.1 kilohertz filter, and I'm going to add some receive EQ as he's talking. And of course, we have some lightning or some static, but because we've elevated the receive EQ here, it makes it easier to listen to.
Thank you for Massachusetts. Have a good one.
One other trick we can do is we can add a tracking notch filter to this guy called a right here, which is a big ugly notch filter. Going to make it very deep. Now that doesn't give us the result we necessarily want, so we can move it over a bit and get rid of some of his, and use that to help notch out some of that guy's signal above. And the nice thing about a tracking notch filter is if I move my VFO, the notch filter does not move. Pretty cool. And that's some of the power of the filtering on a flex radio as well. We'll turn off the tracking notch filter.
Something for Big Bravo.
Satellite SO50 rising.
So how does it all integrate? Beautifully, actually, by using the local area network or your home network in the house. It doesn't take a network genius to hook it all up. You would download one program called Smart SDR, plug the radio into your LAN with your computer, turn it on, and the Smart SDR software immediately sees the radio you connect to it. Now, the advantage of using computer screens is none of us are getting any younger, so us old farts that have to start putting on glasses will see little tiny buttons. Well, guess what? We get to make the buttons bigger when you use Smart SDR on a computer. And then you don't have to use all sort of computer tools. We have this great knob called the Flex Control knob, gives you a nice VFO and some magic buttons to do things. And there's so many OEM, not even OEM, homespun tools to make it easier to customize your station as well. Again, for local and remote. We have, and when you get a copy of this presentation, you're going to get some links to future articles.
Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, can you mention Stream Deck very briefly as a third-party tool?
This?
Yeah.
This is Stream Deck. This is a 15-button one, and you get to program keys to do what you want to do. Now, normally in the past, we would program keys on something and you have to go get the dyno tape machine and print it out and put it on the buttons. Well, Stream Deck, the beauty is when you change a button, you actually can label it right here. These are little OLED screens is what they're called. And you can make them say whatever you want. I don't have FR Stack running, which is the companion program at the moment, but I have my Stream Deck actually in a contest. I've got beam headings, quickly flip antennas around, because if you're contesting, you're awfully going in and out of receive antennas. So that's Stream Deck. This is one of many sort of external ways to integrate stuff, and it's not really expensive. I don't know, about $100 US, I think, for that one, and a whole lot of power and flexibility. The other thing, because now the LAN and the ham shack is becoming such a great thing, often we do all our ham stuff on one computer because we had to, because we connected to the radio by USB, which is still even limiting, or by RS-232 port. But because we have this on the LAN, you can actually use your one computer for computer logging, another computer for WSJT or FD8 or RTTY. Maybe you've got Smart SDR and a third computer because you're just crazy like me. But you have all these options to move things around. Or heck, you could just grab the laptop and go in a different room and make like you're watching the movie with your wife while you're still making FT8 contacts. That sort of slipped out. The wide noise blanker is a really cool noise blanker. Now, remember what I said earlier, green's probably bad. This is some power line noise near my house, so I'm just going to turn it on and off, and you can hear part of a net running, and it gets back about 90% of the QSO.
WB2KAO here. Good morning, Barry.
Now, WB2KAO, we can barely hear. Let me turn the blanker back on.
Yeah, real good, Barry. Just got off the bike, and I thought, well, let me check in with you here for a minute before I go up and get in the shower. We got quite a bit of fuel in.
So which would you rather listen to? If that was me and I came downstairs and turned that on, I would turn it right off and go back to watching a movie or something else. The clients are the part we use to interface with the radios. So I'm Smart SDR for Windows, which is generally what you've seen, or the Maestro, which you've seen as well. But not only that, there's Smart SDR for iPhones, iOS, or Mac. There's Dog Park for also Mac. And I know somebody's going to ask me about where's Android or Linux. I'll be honest, there isn't anything at the moment. We probably don't have time to build it, but because the user interface to control and work with the radio is open sourced available, we're been really hoping somebody would pick it up and actually build a Linux client or an Android client. But so far I've come to the conclusion that there's no ham operators who are HF Linux developers, but maybe that'll change someday. And you saw the Windows client on all my video presentations now will be on the Windows client. But if you look around the screen, the labels are generally the same things. You sit down at any radio you pick up, you need to know volume, where the push to talk switch is, make sure the microphone works, how to change bands, how to change modes, and maybe some filter or gain controls. And they're still labeled all the same thing. I wanted to show the back of the Maestro because this is a great interface as well. You can set this on your desk and hook up all the normal stuff we hook up, from headphones to CW keys to connection to the LAN, external speakers, everything. So, we've gotten rid of a lot of stuff off our desk. And some of the cool things, or I think the more powerful RF tools that usually are reserved for top-end radios, come with even the most basic radio. Any one of the Flex radios is a contrast grade receiver. Now, what does that mean? It means you could use it during CQ Worldwide at the end of March, and which is arguably one of the most difficult sideband contests in the year. And it won't, as we say, fall apart. It'll receive very well. The filtering works amazingly well. You can... it's a full-blown HF radio, so you don't have to buy the top-end radio if you're that type of contester. They have multi-flex and controlled envelope single sideband, which I haven't mentioned yet. Bandpass filters for field day. They don't really interfere with each other, and a whole bunch of things. Now, in the classic comparison chart, I've highlighted some of the more critical things. Remember the spectral capture unit parts? So some radios come with one, some with two. Slices are receive slices. They're virtual receivers, the software term. So you can have 1, 2, 3, 4. In the case of the 6700, you could have 8. Those slices, by the way, are not tied to any specific antenna. So you could have all of them on one antenna, or all of them on another, or 1 and 3, or whatever mixture you want. Great transverter work. I use a 6600 for satellite work. And I have a video near the end. In fact, I was on about just before this started on RS-44. I made about 12 contacts on that satellite pass. It was a lot of fun. I had mentioned CW Skimmer. And remember I said here's de-expedition, and then this 599 will pop up. The skimmer decodes the 599, and that's where I would call him. I have a video on that coming up in a minute, so you can hear what it sounds like. Anybody heard of controlled envelope single sideband? It's a processor. It takes place in the RF section of the radio, and essentially feels like and sounds like you're using twice the power. So 100 watts sounds like 200 watts. 1500 watts sounds like 3000 watts. And this is a algorithm written by David Hirschberger, W9GR, and he donated the algorithm and the science to the ham radio community for free, and we have that built into all our radios. Multiflex is the ability for two people to use the same radio. So you have a family, his and her, his father, son, dad, granddad, and they don't even need to be in the same house, and you can both be on the same radio at the same time. And in case you've never seen a dirty sideband signal, this is a very dirty sideband signal right here. And this is a net control station on 20 meters. I know what radio is using, and he was overdriving it, too much audio gain. He was also feeding it through to an amplifier, making it even worse. Typically, a sideband signal looks like a nice vertical column. This is not good. So thanks to vendors like us and ICOM and Elecraft and the Clean Signal Initiative, where we're going to work to help clean up that splatter. And here's what working at de-expedition sounds like. We've got him here. He's a little faint, and we've got people calling him off frequency. And even without a CW skimmer, I can watch and see where I should call. We have some DX here on 15 meters, and this is 8 Quebec 7 Delta X-ray. I have my packet cluster spot there. We can see him calling, and we can see people answering now. The pile-up's thinned out a bit, but you can see it'd be easier for him to work because there's not many people calling him back. Now, granted, he's half a world away, and sometimes I can't hear everybody calling him, but I got him on the second call sheerly by watching him call and waiting for and seeing where people are answering him. So let's have a listen. And if we watch, we can see this guy's calling too often because he's doubling with him. Eventually, he may hear him if 8 Quebec 7 Delta X-rays receiver is here, which is up about 1500 hertz. Now we don't see the next guy replying, which is unfortunate, but you get the idea. If they reply, you'll see them. As an example, if someone replied, if this was the guy he was working, we could just double click our mouse and move over there and have a listen. And we could set this up in stereo so that we'd have the de-expedition on the left and maybe the masses on the right. So let's go back, see if he actually gets this guy. There you go. And if I was me, I would call right here because I know that's where his receiver is. That's the power of working a de-expedition using a waterfall. And I wish my CW was that fast. For our HF operators who are into digital modes, you don't need any extra hardware. You still run the same programs on your PC, WSJT, DM780, FLDigi, JTDX, but there is a little helper program there called CAT and DAX that you use to connect to the radio. So even old software that used RS-232 or serial port communication works just as fine. You guys are on 80 meters or on low band stuff, you know how noisy it can be and static crashes wipe you out. Here's a listen on the automatic gain control does wipe out the static crash, but not the QSO. And just typically when I tend to record QSOs off 80 meters, it's really hard to dial around 80 meters on a given night and find somebody not talking about their meds. So I did that, but of course, this is a little unique conversation as well. See it, I'm about here. In fact, I'm right there. That little green dot is my lightning map receiver. And here's the storm right over Lake Huron coming into Georgian Bay. And you can see a bit of stuff going on here, so we'll get rid of that. So let's turn on the audio, and I want you to just listen to what we're hearing here. Okay. My AGCT for 80 meters, let's see, is way too high. Let me turn off my audio. Or we'll turn this down. If I adjust my AGCT just down, you'll notice it gets really quiet. But you go, I'm not going to be able to hear anything. Let me turn this, no, I'm going to turn this level up to normal level. And we hear that click. And that's the Fast Attacks Dual AGC. Click on, click off. I'm at medium, by the way, not at fast, not at slow. So how does that translate if you want to listen to a couple of guys? There's a net here on 3755.
1718. Anyway, the one went into the silo, died from the gas. The other one went into, seen his brother floundering there, went in and he died too.
So you'll notice we can hear, that's my buddy Chad, speaking, just rag chewing about whatever. And plain as day, sort of like the winter on a quiet day. Yeah, it's not perfect, but man, it's easy to listen to.
Similar story. Silos are nothing to mess with. Matter of fact, a lot of people put signs on the doors, especially up high, not to get in there. And that's a shame. Thanks for sharing that with everyone. It's VE2HOG, and he's a farmer, so he knows what's going on. This is the OnTARS net. Anybody like to check in before I have to check?
Remote operation in the last 5 years become very mainstream in amateur radio, especially for HF. And the reason being, well, the reasons are many. A lot of us are downsizing, or a lot of my friends have downsized. So groups of people get together and they build their own HF station that they can use remotely because they've moved into an apartment building, a condo, or assisted living or something. And now, thanks to a tool that we developed and called SmartLink, has the ability to very easily get on remotely without having to be a network guru. In fact, you don't need to know any networking tools. Works very well. It also means you can take your iPad into somebody who's in assisted living, get them back on the air. Maybe he's been on HF his whole life, and that's pretty helpful and fun to see as well. But even more so, we're now seeing more and more remote de-expeditions, such as this picture from Fox Oscar / Alpha Alpha 7 Juliet Victor, George Wallner's group, where they deploy a little lunar rover on the beach with antennas, and they go back out to the boat, which is way over here, and they operate. And now George's team doesn't even have to be on the boat. They could be operating anywhere in the world. It keeps the cost down. The entities that control these islands really like this because it's very small human footprint. They don't have to worry about a ton of people being on the island and latrines and damage causing from all that. So it's all a really good thing. Really quickly, single operator 2 radio is a contesting thing for contesters that are really bored and they just want to make their life even more busy. And it's where you double everything. And essentially you take 2 radios and 2 amplifiers and specialized antenna switches, and you have this big, beautiful, complicated network. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this person is Sierra Echo 3 X-ray Jan, and this was his station. He ultimately rebuilt the whole thing, and this is now what it looks like in the Flex radio design. And the advantage of having less cables and less, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff running around here versus this is cables are RF noisy. They contribute to our noise floor in HF radio. And the more you get away from, the more you remove from the radio, the quieter your radio gets. And this is why you also need to choke radios, cables coming into radios, because it's not just for transmission, it's also for reception. This big amplifier is called the Power Genius XL. Now, it is also an SO2R amplifier, which means it can transmit and receive at the same time or run in full duplex. But it's got one piece of technology that no other amateur radio HF amplifier has. And when we amplify, it's called the harmonic dummy load. And when we amplify an HF signal, generally we want, like, say, 14 megs to go out the antenna. But 28 megs and beyond, those harmonics, we can't let go out the antenna. The FCC gets a little grumpy when you do that. So all of our HF radios have low pass filters to prevent this from happening. So what do you do with that energy? Well, every other HF radio, that energy hits the low pass filter, which is, like a high SWR, and bounces right back into the power amplifier, and it can cause distortion. In this case, we have the Power Genius has a high pass filter, which funnels that energy over into a dummy load. Now, how much energy is it? Well, it's actually quite a bit, because the dummy load's a 400-watt dummy load. It actually gets hot. So, and fans go off to cool it, and this gives you a much cleaner signal, and certainly is a lot easier on your LMDOSs and stuff. Its sister to go with it is the Tuner Genius, which is a full duplex tuner, or what we call a 1x3, which means it'll support 3 antennas, works with all the flex radios and OEM radios. And it has all these features. You can read through this later. It's LAN controlled. It's great for remote. It's incredibly fast. It runs up to 2 kilowatts of power. And it has a whole bunch of memories, which is what people in the tuner world want. And you can also do a whole bunch of OEM interfacing to it as well. So it doesn't just work with flex radios. Both the amplifier and the tuner work with Kenwood, ICOM, Yaesu, Elecraft radios. And one last video. This is if you've never seen a satellite QSO, which is great for, you know what, you don't have to wait for sunspots. And we have this part here is the bat wing. It's a telemetry signal from a satellite. We've got some CW here. We've got some sideband here. And here's 20 seconds of a QSO.
I guess it's something you need to do, but boy, you hate to do it. Oh, there goes that new radio, Peter. Probably about 5, 6 of them, Jeff, over. Roger that. And I was just thinking I'm doing a lot of part-time work, and I'm thinking maybe I could afford that 7300, but with the roof coming, no, not this year. Okay. I'm surprised you don't have one already. I've got an old IC7410 that I really like, and I've got a 991A here, and I'd actually assume it's affordable.
And sometimes satellites fade a little bit. It would have come right back. If we have great user groups in the community and Facebook. We have over 6,600 members in Facebook. 5,995 of them are wonderful. We had about 5 or 6 trolls, but that's good. We need them. They keep us honest. If you ever want more information on this as an HF radio, you can pick up the phone and call us. We'd be glad to talk to you on the phone. 2-year warranty, upgradable 4 years. Nobody does that. And if you're ever thinking of buying a radio from us, just call in, talk to Andy or myself. Say you saw my presentation, and we've always got some special pricing. And we actually take trade-ins if you really want to clean out your shack. And we are done, and I'm open to any questions. I'll stop sharing. I will stop sharing. There it is.
Oh, to the New World Sat operator. We have somebody who's Eddie Pettis, who's been very much involved in SAT work. He used to have a colleague here. I'll let him mention to you. That colleague edited the AMSAT Journal in the day. What do you think, Eddie?
I don't like it. I like the HF part of it too.
The satellite part's really fun because in the true analog world, you get on the satellite and you're dialing around trying to find people. Now I just see them call CQ. I can visually see the CQ. I click on the mouse. I'm working them right away.
What's satellite?
And then you can see the guys that are trying to find themselves. You know, the ones that are whistling,
Yeah.
trying to net their receiver. It's quite funny.
What about the satellite one that you did just a minute ago? What part was it?
Say that again. Which
satellite were you using when you were doing that last demonstration?
I think that was CAS 4B.
Okay.
I'm now pretty much full-time on RS-44 just because it's nice long pass.
And working a lot of the earlier satellites, AO10, 13, AO40, you know, that group with the elliptical orbits,
was a fun thing to do, and being able to hear the weak signal
Yeah.
at 29 and 30 kilometers.
Mike, we've got.
Yeah. And I'm just using my
Go ahead. Mike.
really quickly. I'm just using my terrestrial UHF and VHF antenna. It's like 20 elements on UHF and a whole lot less on VHF. But I worked a guy today. He was in Vermont with a Arrow antenna, and he was working RS-44 from a 9700, and he was just hand lobbing the antenna around, and he was beautiful into the bird.
Mike, we've got an Apple employee here who's a Mac guy. Tell him about the guy in Germany and his software that he's written for Smart SDR.
Roger, DL8 MRE, Marcus has written clients to work with our radios. He's also written them to work with a few other radios. Pretty sharp guy, did all his own development, and he just sort of essentially wrote it on his own and showed up in the door and said, "What do you think?" He's very, very nice guy.
That's impressed me about Flex. They don't see that as competition. They see that as free labor that helps their product line, basically. I mean, it's for everybody, you know. Any Linux heads out here? Because there's a Linux app, and I suspect our friend in Germany makes a couple of bucks for his labor. So anybody with chiphead who's in the Linux world, whatever distro, and for my 2 cents, if you're in the Debian world, you're going to get a whole lot of distros there. There's some money to be made for doing some of this. Scott Larson sat there in the back.
And the
computer stuff.
The pen adapter and waterfall, by the way, there's no math there. It's actually a movie. We just send frames back to you. So all you have to do is play the movie and everything overlays. So, and all the communications in plain text. It's quite easy to read.
Yeah. Any other questions, Officer Bray? We've got some folks sitting here in the back. I'm not going to point them out, but they're big digital folks. And so one of the things I like about your talk, Mike, is you showed how, no, you don't have a lot of the problems that some of the radios you see on YouTube that folks are reviewing. Hey, I got this thing for like $2 out of China, and I think I can make it work digital. You're in a whole different paradigm with Flex and doing digital modes, right?
Yeah, I have some screenshots. And they come and go in my presentations, but so if you're an FT8 user and we tend to look at the signal to noise ratio, I have screenshots where I'm copying a plus 12 SNR guy, and 100 hertz away I'm copying a minus 17. And you can't do that with a stock sound card. The dynamic range is not there. And then the loud signals too on superhit radios will drive the AGC, the automatic gain control, way down, and you just lose the weak signals because you just don't have the preamps running. And this is not the way it works, but I sort of describe it as having all these little micro slices of radio spectrum that have their own gain control type of thing. And in RTTY, I've copied stuff in RTTY for contests that I have no reason to thought would even work. Where I'm right beside a big gun station. K3LR is not that far away, the other side of, Lake Erie. And I was on 80 meters in RTTY contest, and, he's printing away, and about, 60, 70 hertz, just down a bit, I'm copying a South American RTTY multiplier I need, and I could barely hear him, and he's printing perfectly. I mean, that's called the dynamic range. And you just don't see that in a whole lot of radios. Good ones, yes, but the DAC or the sound cards are pretty cheap.
You walk up to a vendor at a ham fest or even at a place like HRO, you won't get that comparison, in my humble opinion. I mean, you'll get to see different brands, but you've really got to look at the Flex to see things like what you just said, Mike. That's one of the reasons why I'm glad you were willing to make this talk. Any other questions or observations for Eddie?
What about weak signal on EME VHF?
Good question. We have a fair number of guys that use these for EME, for Q65. They liked, for 2 meters, they liked the 6700 because it had 5 milliwatts out and they can drive their big amps as well. Mississauga Amateur Radio Club near us uses one with a transverter. They do a whole lot of UHF EME. I am I will try to do at least 1 or 2 EME contacts for my home QTH, but I have to get the preamp installed on the roof. And the preamp's only been sitting on the side of my desk for about a year, so no excuse.
Yeah, Mike's not very busy. He's only developing his own 6-meter amp and a bunch of other stuff. But,
Oh
yeah.
no, but the UHF amp, no, it's in the same number of pieces over there.
Oh, any other questions?
That one I haven't been that motivated over.
Any other questions?
Anybody else?
Let's give Mike a big round of applause. Give Mike a big round of applause. Mike, thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate you spending your time. I know you kind of do that for your employer anyway, but hey, you know, it is your schedule, it is your time, and I appreciate you kind of coming out, particularly at night here and joining our club. So a big thank you from Vicksburg.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. You know, the last 3 weeks, I think I've done 19 presentations. It's like everybody booked me for their fall thing. So it was, I'm glad. Hopefully you guys got a couple of things. I didn't bore the crap out of you, and it was a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you, Mike. Take care.
7-3.